on. I think we'll begin.
All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the session entitled Navigating the 2023 NIH Data Management and Sharing Policy, Understanding the Impact on Research Administrators. Your panel today is Matt Harp, Associate Librarian, Open Science and Scholarly Communication at Arizona State University. We have Jerry Perry, the Associate Dean, University of Arizona Libraries, University of Arizona. Fernando Rios, Associate Specialist, Research Data Management, the University of Arizona, and Jen McCormick, Associate Research Development, University of Arizona. Before we get started, I'm going to put the survey in the chat. Please complete it at the end of the session, and I will put it once more at the end of the session into the chat. And Jerry?
Thank you, Sean. Thank you so much, Sean. I'm going to go ahead and use screen share and share our slides. So good morning, everyone. And my name again is Jerry Perry, and I'm the Associate Dean for the University of Arizona Libraries. And part of my portfolio is serving as the Associate Dean for Research in our organization. So our session today is navigating the 2023 NIH Data Management and Sharing Policy and understanding the impact on research administrators. And as my colleagues present, they'll give more information about themselves. I have to say our work is a culmination, our presentation today is the culmination of a village. A lot of individuals are involved in the work that we're wanting to report on today. So you'll see them on the slides as projected. Hopefully, if you have any questions or you want to contact any of us, please let me know. But for the interest of time, I won't go through the full list. So the goals that we have for this session, recognizing who this audience is that we want to give you a sense of the overview for this new NIH Data Management and Sharing Policy as it relates to grant requirement. Our focus is to help you help researchers, and if you're a researcher directly, of course, on some of the most basic aspects of this policy. And we also want to make sure that you have an idea of where you can go for some additional assistance. So we'll be giving you a background on this effort and the policy, and giving a sense of a high-level understanding of what should go into a DMSP. We'll talk a bit about compliance and costing aspects, right? Because these things come up all the time as central as a concern. Talk a little bit about resources, and we'll do a walkthrough of some examples to give folks some grounding context as we go forward. If folks have questions during the course of this session, we're hoping you'll post them to chat. We'll pay attention, but we'll address questions at the end of the session. And we'll also try to post links as they come up during the course of our discussion. So the new NIH Data Management Sharing Policy. Let's go on. What it is and why. So NIH has a new data management and sharing policy. We call it the DMS or DMSP. It went into force in January of 2023. And there's an associated requirement with this policy that individuals, investigators, submit a data management and sharing plan. This is substantially different than a prior policy that was in effect that started in the early aughts. The DMSP is a short, structured document that outlines how data will be shared. And it becomes, this is important, becomes parts of the terms and conditions of an award. So I mentioned the prior requirement dating from 2003. At that time, it was only for grants that where we were seeking more than $500,000 per year in direct costs. It included, it required, sorry, stumbling there, a short paragraph explaining what will be shared and how, or if it wasn't going to be shared, why it can't be shared and what was the rationale for it. Folks might see we've got an instance up on the screen. We've kind of color-coded the area where we're explaining what is the nature of the data and then why some of it will be made available and why some won't. In this instance, there was a data sharing agreement that had implications. So the new requirement, this is pertaining to all proposals that produce scientific data, and they must have a DMSP. The new requirement requires a plan that is 2 pages or fewer. It's recommended. It has to address 6 key areas, and the focus is describing plans for preparing data for sharing, the where, the how long the data will be shared, to address any privacy concerns, which are really critical, and very importantly, who is responsible for this particular plan and for the data. Something that the plan does not do is it does not apply if a proposal is not producing scientific data. So some examples of those might be training or T grants, fellowships, things that apply to construction or conferences like R13s, resource-focused grants, and then those that are infrastructural related. So we've got a link, see NIH's comprehensive list of activity codes, and I think Fernando, I believe is going to be posting those for you. So what is scientific data? So scientific data is, of course, the recorded factual material commonly accepted in the scientific community of sufficient quality to validate, replicate research findings, regardless of whether the data are used to support scholarly communications. Once again, what does this not include? Does not include lab notebooks or preliminary analyses, completed case report forms, nor drafts of scientific papers. Doesn't include plans for future research, doesn't require the peer reviews. It does not include communications with colleagues, and it doesn't include physical objects such as specimens. And again, we've posted a link, at least in the slide, where you can see the final NIH policy. Encourage folks to look at it. So individuals might wonder, why in heaven's name is NIH doing this? Well, NIH has long championed policies that make research available to the public that is funding this research through taxpayer taxes, thinking timeliness, right? It does want to, we had the 2003 policy, and there was a desire to update on that. Just noting that there was a 2014 policy that focused on genomic data sharing. And of course, we all know what is happening around genomics and genome mapping and how much advancement there has been so quickly, largely, we believe, due to the having a policy like this in place. So the tenor of the conversation around data sharing has changed, and there certainly is a desire for data to sharing. We want to emphasize the impact of this publicly invested research. We know that data management is the gateway to data sharing, so reproducibility really does require that we have well-structured and accessible data. And we want to encourage and support reproducibility of research. That's how science gets done, right? We know also that there's a system-wide culture change that is needed. And folks here at our institution, certainly, and I know it elsewhere, are looking at the OSTP Nelson memo, which is another act that focuses on the openness of science and openness of data. So the bottom line really is that NIH now has this expectation of all the scientific data being shared where they're funding that. A little bit real quickly about how the process works. Folks will submit their plans with their applications. A brief plan description goes into the budget justification, and the full plan is a separate attachment. That plan assessment will be done by peer reviewers, but not scored, and they'll comment in the budget. The NIH program staff will assess the plan, and then plans can be revised by those who've submitted. And then, of course, the key piece that we're all focusing on right now, plan compliance. We know that the plan will be incorporated into terms. It'll be monitored regularly, and with tools for supporting oversight under development presently. And compliance could, in fact, be a factor to future funding decisions. So something to obviously pay attention to. Speaking real quickly, because I'm probably running out of time, I wanted to say just a little bit about our institutional responses. I'll speak from the perspective of University of Arizona, and then my great colleague Matt is going to speak around ASU's efforts. But at U of A, among our federal funding sources, Health and Human Services, including NIH, constitutes about 50% of our our funding from those sources, and that's fiscal year 22 HERD data. So you can see that it's critically important. UA put together a team that was launched in 2021 and included our research, innovation, and impact, which is the research enterprise for U of A, the libraries, our IT enterprise, and the Data Science Institute, among others, with representatives coming together to work collaboratively on this. I was part of a sub-team that focused on communication strategy. We leveraged our instance of Trellis and the Office of the Senior Vice President for Research and Innovation to get the word out. We built a website with thanks to Fernando, who's on this call, and a colleague of his, Jim Martin. And we use that as a hub to provide direction and learning objects and the examples, which are ever popular. And we did extensive outreach to our campus research administrators, senior PIs. We leveraged our library liaisons to reach individual investigators and other campus stakeholders. And right now we're shifting a little bit to start focusing on sensitive data components, including tribal data. I'm going to hand it over now to my terrific colleague, Matt, who's going to speak on the perspective from ASU.
Thank you, Jerry. So I'm Matthew Harp. I'm a research data initiatives librarian. I am in the ASU library in our unit for open science and scholarly communication. My work typically involves working directly with the research data management office at ASU, which is in the knowledge enterprise and the research technology office. And, we work hand in hand together on pretty much everything. And that all the way from data management planning, which provides feedback and proposal support, all the way to when folks are actually ready to publish and share their data openly with the world. And then also guiding folks on sometimes what not to share. So we do talk a lot about open science and open sharing, but as Jerry mentioned, there is a lot of sensitivity and ethical issues around research data that we have to keep in mind of. So that is a part of our work. So the data policy for the NIH came out, again, it was an extension of a policy that came out 10 years ago. So we were somewhat prepared for that. And with that in mind, we actually had a conversation amongst NAU, U of A, and ASU about the need for actual dedicated research data policies, because while we had data policies at our universities, they were typically directed towards administrative or student data, business, that sort of thing, but not necessarily to the nuances which we typically consider with research data. For example, research data needs to be retained much longer than just legal requirements for business data, right? Because of the fact that it can be reused for other projects. So we had a long conversation. We're talking more than a year of formulating a proposal for a policy and then drafting what a policy would look like. And then in the fall of 2022, ASU put out a request for comment. So we allowed about a month or so for researchers to actually provide their feedback, which is available on the page that Fernando is going to be sharing in chat. You can actually see what some of those responses were. In addition to that, as Jerry mentioned, the U of A put out a hub page, and we actually used that work. We worked with Fernando to extract what they had done, that scaffolding, and we created our own NIH data management and sharing policy library guide. And that's really been a great place to send folks when they just have some basic questions about the NIH. It really walks folks through the things that they need to be thinking about at a very high level, but also provides an opportunity for them to connect with us if they have questions, if we need to do a consultation. It's just a great place to kind of triage things, I guess you could say. In addition to that, we also had in November a community conversation, mostly a listening session with actual researchers and staff and everybody from research administration and forth about what questions and concerns and what needs do they have related to the policy, because we didn't want to just be making this stuff up and assuming we knew what people needed, because we really don't. And so that was a great opportunity, and it's actually given us a lot of data to start building future programming. And in fact, just this week on Tuesday, we were a part of a research kickoff call on data management that was researcher facing, that allowed us, again, to kind of talk about what resources are available at our university related to data management, planning, and sharing. And with this in mind, the university is really taking notice of it. We are seeing an uptick in requests and questions, et cetera, and just workflow needs. So we are expanding both in the Office of Research Data Management and in the library. We have new positions that are being developed, and some are in open recruitment right now. And Jerry, we can go ahead and jump to the next slide. And so I'm just gonna really cover really quickly what a data management and sharing plan actually consists of. And that one is that we know it's about planning for the future. You know, we talk a lot about like, well, this just goes into the proposal, but these are actionable things that need to be acted on. So basically NIH has broken it down into 6 basic elements. And by the way, this is actually typical for most funding agencies. These elements within a data management and sharing plan are short, 1 to 2 pages. They need to be very specific, but actionable, and also understand that the PI is the person that is accountable for it, not necessarily the units or resources that they're allocating or recognizing in the plan. They are the ones that are accountable for it. So they need to make sure that they read the plan and that what they're putting in there is something that they're actually planning to do for an accountability perspective, and if there's ever an audit or anything like that. So read through it, make sure that they're going to be able to do it. They should also be considering, you know, there are no default elements to this, and that also these plans are not fixed, that they can actually be updated over time through the course of the project. So these are actionable. These are things that can be updated, and if there's a review period or whatever during the course of this project, that can actually update these plans and then report it back to the funding agency. The NIH also knows that not all data should be shared, but all data should be managed. Again, there are ethical, legal considerations that need to be concerned, particularly around health science data. So therefore they have room to explain and justify what can be shared and what isn't going to be shared, and how they're actually going to protect, for example, the identities of folks that are a part of a research project. They just can't say, well, we just have to keep it all because of X, Y, and Z, and you know, folks can just reach out to us if they need to access stuff. That's not legitimate anymore. Also, they need to consider that if they have any kind of consent forms, because this is like if there's any data use agreements or anything involved, those have to be consistent with what's in the data management plan. Or should I say, the data management plan needs to be consistent with any kind of tools that they're using. So any kind of consent forms, these need to be checked and make sure that they are absolutely consistent. Let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. So apologies, I know this seems like a lot to take in. It looks like a tentacle from an octopus. But what it is there's a lot of elements that go into data management planning. The elements that actually go into a proposal are going to be very brief, broken down. Again, you're kind of like surmising it into these 6 things. It's 1 to 2 pages, right? So it's not a novel. It's not everything that you're going to do, and it's not the day-to-day. It's just the overall understanding that you have a plan, you understand what you're going to do, and you have that end goal in mind in doing it. With this in mind, this graphic actually comes from a great article that's in PLOS called 10 Simple Rules for Maximizing the Recommendations of the NIH DMSP. This article, I believe, is actually linked to in both the U of A and ASU hubs and guides. It's something we highly recommend folks like read through. So this might be something you recommend folks check out, because it really, you know, 10 simple rules, right? It's kind of a cool concept. Folks can read it. It's easy to understand. I think we'll have the link to the article in chat there as well. Okay, so getting back again, we can move to the next slide, Jerry. When folks are drafting a DMSP, again, 2 pages or fewer. It's not long. Many times when I'm consulting with folks, they have like a 5 or 6 page data management plan, and they're very eloquent, but they really don't need to be. It's very simple. Think of it like a resume almost, right? You just want people to have that really quick glance and just say, yep, they've got all their ducks in order. Nothing looks weird here. They're not just using some boilerplate language that somebody used in the past. We have a couple of tools that are available for folks that you can point people to. One is that the NIH actually provides a blank Word document file that folks can fill in, just like you see on the screenshot here, where it's basically broken down. You just fill in below in those respective sections. The other thing that we recommend, it's a tool called the DMP tool. Some of you may already be familiar with it. I will talk about it in just a little bit. In fact, on the next slide, we're going to talk about the DMP tool, which we highly, highly recommend. Okay, let's go ahead and jump to that. Let's talk about the DMP tool a little bit. So the DMP tool, it's a free web-based tool that provides examples and general guidance based on specific funding agency requirements in a simple to use online template, right? And again, they have one for the NIH and it is current to the new policy. It's used by many institutions around the world. I believe there's 82,235 current users. That number may have even increased since we last took that poll. PIs can request institutional feedback because it's a database. It also provides us on the back end greater understanding of what is actually being put into those data management plans. The U of A and ASU both provide training modules for using the DMP tool. You can also typically request a consultation. Someone can walk folks through how to actually fill those things out. The DMP tool is really, really awesome. It's not so much about just writing it, but about getting that feedback and guidance. If you can see it, I know it's kind of hard to read, and that's the right side of the slide is a screenshot of where someone's actually filling out that plan. And on the left, or should I say on the right, there's some tabs. And one is like, what institution have you picked? So if it's ASU, U of A, or both, you can actually see what recommendations they have. The DMP tool has guidance information. Plus there is a place on there where a data manager or a librarian is going to be providing feedback on that section. Okay, Jerry, let's go ahead and jump to the next slide. Some things you want to be mindful of and be aware of is that a PI must provide justification for what data will not be shared and how they will protect privacy. I already mentioned this, but it's something we just need to reinforce. Legal and ethical considerations, including protocols for working with Indigenous populations, should absolutely be considered and should absolutely be indicated in there. Again, you cannot just justify that the data is either too small to be shared or that it's not going to be of value to anybody or you're afraid of being scooped. That is not a justification for not sharing data. So again, remind folks, they actually do have to have a plan for what will and won't be shared. Also, and again, this is something that can be done in the DMP tool, is they can actually choose and describe a disciplinary, general, or institutional repository that they might be sharing their data in. The NIH actually provides some guidance on choosing a repository. It is in their policy notice. I think Fernando will be putting that in chat as well. And there's actually a more human readable, I kind of prefer this one too. You really need to take both of these in mind, but there is a browsable listing of NIH supported repositories that folks can go through that the NIH actually provides. And then let's go ahead and jump to the next slide. Just some pitfalls and challenges. Plans must be completed when submitted. In other words, so when someone is submitting their data management plan, all those sections need to be filled out. You can't skip or just refer or use general terminology anymore. We have seen those. There is no one size fits all. So again, PIs should not be cutting and pasting text from previous proposals or examples of data management plans unless it actually applies to their work. In addition to indicating roles and responsibilities, again, ultimately, it is the PI that is responsible and the one held accountable for what is in their plan, and they should explain what can and can't be shared. I keep saying this because that is really, really important. And another challenge is that the modular budget for direct cost limits has not changed in over 20 years, which I think really is going to lead into the next session, which my colleague Fernando is going to explain when we jump into costs. Let's go ahead and jump to the next slide, and thank you.
Terrific.
All right. Thanks, Matt, for the handoff. So what I'm going to spend the next few minutes talking about now is maybe a little bit of the nuts and bolts on costing and actually putting together the DMSP materials. Next slide, Jerry. So when it comes to data management and sharing costs, the NIH does have a list of allowable and unallowable costs. Allowable costs generally fall into the category of supporting the actual execution of the plan, especially around, doing data curation, data sharing, de-identification, that kind of stuff. And the allowable costs, whatever they may be, the key point is that they have to be incurred during the performance period. So this is especially important if a PI is saying that they're going to deposit a data set into a repository that charges money to make something available over the long term. So that cost is allowable, but it must be prepaid during the performance period. So some unallowable costs include things like infrastructure costs that are typically included in indirect costs, or costs that are associated with the routine conduct of research, like gaining access to research data. The link here, thanks Matt for posting that. That's the NIH's link to the full list and detailed list of what they allow and don't allow. Next slide, please. So when it comes to actually putting together the budget, I'm going to talk about modular budgets first. And again, just as a reminder, these are for proposals for up to $250,000 in annual direct costs. So for these modular budgets, the data management and sharing cost part goes into a section within the additional narrative justification form. And this section has to be called data management and sharing justification. So when talking about justifications in the budget, the NIH recommends them to be no more than half a page, and it should summarize essentially what goes into the larger DMSP, the DMSP plan that Matt was talking about. So it should summarize the data that was going to be shared or preserved. It should name the repositories and talk a little bit about the general cost categories. And if there are no costs for data management sharing, this should just be zero. Next slide. For a detailed budget, all the costs for data management should be included in one single line item, and that should go into section F. And specifically, that line item has to be called exactly with these exact words: data management and sharing costs. Again, if there are no costs, this line item should not be left blank. It should be entered zero. And then the supporting details around this budget request need to be outlined in the budget justification in a section that's specifically titled Data Management and Sharing Justification. And that should be attached in section L. And again, it should be no more than one page, no more than half a page. And it should talk about the things that I mentioned in the previous slide. Next, please. So when it comes to subawards, I think this might be one of the trickier aspects, because there's so many ways a grant can have subawards or subcomponents. But when talking about subawards specifically, the DMSP policy does apply to subrecipients. However, there is only going to be one single overall parent data management and sharing plan that applies to all the subrecipients, and then there needs to be some coordination that happens between all participants to make sure that the plan gets executed and that all aspects are addressed. So because this policy applies to subrecipients as well, these subrecipients do also have the responsibility to do the whatever sharing and management that is outlined in the parent DMSP. Importantly, though, that the subrecipients also, they do have to budget for their costs for data management and sharing, and they do that again separately on their modular budget or R&R budget forms. The NIH has a great FAQ on this. They explain everything in a lot more detail than I have time for, so I'll refer you to that page. Next slide. Okay, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about once we prepared the budget and prepared the DMSP, where to actually submit it in the system. Next. So the DMSP itself goes into the research plan section under other plans as an attachment. And like was mentioned previously, the DMS plan, while it is reviewed by the ICO, it's not going to be visible to peer reviewers under most cases. However, the thing that peer reviewers can see and comment on is the budget and the budget justification. One thing I do want to point out as well here is the fact that previously, if the work was related to genomic data sharing or genomic data, there was a genomic data sharing plan that has now been folded in to the DMSP. So any work related to that, any sharing related to genomic data is also described within the larger DMSP. It's no longer a separate attachment. I did put a link here at the bottom of the slide. The NIH has put in some error checking into the submission form. So if you do get some validation errors, this helpful link, I found it really useful. That really clearly explains where those errors might be coming from and how to fix them. Next slide, please. Okay, so everything's been put together. Everything has been submitted. What happens after that grant is submitted? So as I mentioned in the previous slide, these plans are reviewed by the ICO. And if there are any changes that are needed, these changes will be requested during the just-in-time process. And after that, if the grant is awarded, as Jerry mentioned at the beginning, the plan becomes a term and condition of the award. The compliance mechanism is still, we still are awaiting some details from the NIH on how exactly this will happen, but they've stated that they plan to track progress with compliance with the DMSP through the RPPR reports. What they haven't said is what they will do if they find that somebody's not in compliance. So we're still waiting on that. However, they have said that failure to comply may result in some kind of enforcement action. And that can include adding special terms and conditions or even termination of the award. And as Jerry said, it can affect future funding decisions. Next, please. So all the information that I presented in this section is available on sharing.nih.gov. This is what I consider the source of truth when it comes to this NIH DMSP. So if you see any information that contradicts what I said, definitely take the NIH's word for it, not mine. And I think with that, I believe that's my last slide. Yeah. So now I'll turn it over to my colleague Jen that will now walk us through some example texts. So take it away.
Thanks so much, Fernando. And we can go to the next slide, Jerry. Thanks. My name is Jen McCormick. Unlike my colleagues, I work in a different stage of the grant cycle. I'm in research development. We're considered pre-award. We offer technical review of all the research narrative documents before they go off to the pre-award office and then submission. And so what I wanted to share is I reached out to a couple PIs that I worked with who did the first submission cycle since the new policy was enacted and had 4 different teams who generously shared. We have a couple examples working with human subjects, mass spectrometry data, and some vertebrate animals. So just a quick review from the UA side. We, over in my office, we are so grateful to our colleagues who set up and took such a proactive approach to this policy so that when we have requests from the PI, we could jump into sharing resources. Or I've already reached out to Jim and Fernando a couple of times with the data management plan. So of course, we've got the libraries and the data cooperative. As Matt shared, we highly encourage people to use the DMP tool. And then I think there's some of my colleagues in the other pre-award offices on this call. They also have been sharing the resources as well as the NIH things, including University of Arizona Health Services, College of Agriculture and Life Sciences, Cal pre-award offices. For this cycle, I worked with a lot of folks who did not use the DMP tool and went straight to that NIH template in terms of just jumping right into it. A little reluctantly, and then I provided a little technical review as well as reaching out to a lot of collaborators that were on that first slide. Next slide, please. Thank you. So as I said, I have 4 diverse examples. These 4 were proposals in the R series. This includes an R01, an R01A1 or resubmission, and then a really interesting one, which is a combination of an R33 and R61. Without getting into the weeds of that, that's basically 2 different types of data collection over an extended grant cycle. It was also a diversity of NIH institutes and centers or ICs, including the HEAL initiative. And I bring that out because as Jerry shared early on, there are NIH ICs that have always had a data management and sharing plan, and the HEAL initiative is one of those. And then you'll note I used a little color coding to help us. Next slide. Matt already gave us such a beautiful profile, the walkthrough, but you'll see each slide that I share the concrete data from, I pulled from the different elements that are on that NIH template. Next slide, please. Okay, so for the first one, in different data types, what we thought might be really helpful for y'all, and we'll be sharing slides, is how the different PIs actually responded to defining their data type within, exactly as Matt shared, make it concise, 2 pages, don't include URLs and so forth. So for our human subjects, one, we're talking about demographic data, 100 participants. They included elements of what the pre and post-treatment data would be, how it was going to be collected, then when it was going to be converted into different formattings, and sort of the time element with these data conversions. Human B is again our R33, R61, where we're actually dealing with human participants who are clinic patients. So we're talking about actual clinical staff. We're talking about folks who are dealing with opioid treatments. So all of the sensitivities in terms of being actual patients in a treatment program, dealing with also, again, that R33 and the R61, the difference in data. The R61 phase was 500 people over that 2-year. By the time they get to the R33, we're talking about 3,500 participants. And then we're also talking about staff and patients in these clinics. So a lot of sensitive data. Next slide, please. By comparison, my folks over in vertebrate, animal, and mass spec, very concise responses to element 1 with data type. And perhaps could also be a bit more elaborated, but again, we wanted to share very real examples. We're not sharing perfect examples, we're sharing real submitted examples. Next slide. Element 5. So here we're getting into the access, distribution, or reuse considerations. And here's where we're getting into those privacy considerations that all 3 of my colleagues have noted. I wanted to bring out human A participant example. This was one where we consulted, I consulted with Fernando, I consulted with Stephanie Carroll Rainey, who's on that first slide. She has many appointments, but including is acting director over at the Native Nations Institute and works on data sovereignty with Native Nations, as well as our own Native Peoples Technical Office and our Human Subjects IRB office, Christine Melton Lopez. And this was a situation where it was not data that was a research project directly with a Native nation. This was one where we thought if patients are also members of a Native nation, we want to show that we recognize that there are going to be special considerations. And so you can see there, we added that there would be tribal things that may actually be different than some of the federal and state laws, and we recognize that. Next slide. Human B, here we are actually talking about coding to protect these human participants. Again, this is the group who are receiving the opioid treatment. Again, very sensitive patient data as well as staff data. So this PI beautifully talked about how they were going to code, to cloak geocode and locations for the protection, what the different de-identification considerations would be, and basically what is the process that is going to be to protect the human subjects whose data is going to be publicly shareable. Next slide. And again, here we are with our animal and our mass spec. Didn't even need to worry about it so much. Next slide. Element 6. So this is one that Fernando and Jim helped our office out a lot with. In the NIH template, when we talk about element 6, oversight of data management and sharing, and this goes back to something Matt said, the NIH boilerplate language is actually not relevant to the University of Arizona's organization, and I would guess ASU's as well. They, even just the way they talk about the Office of Sponsored Projects or what that would be. And so you can see all 4 of our PIs handled that question really differently, specifically to their control over the data, how they were going to be working with compliance, as well as what the institutional resources and role were in that. Next slide. So I also thought for those of you who work on the ground with PIs, it might be great to know what are the most common questions that we've received over in our pre-award office. And one of those that I don't have down is budgeting, which Fernando covered beautifully. And then the over at our data cooperative, we have a great module by Lori Schultz. This is a big one we're getting in terms of how do I work out the budgets? In addition to those, element 4, 5, and 6 have been our top questions from principal investigators. What archive should I pick? Again, we defer back to their expertise. What are sort of the disciplinary ways? We don't know your data the way you know. And then, of course, that NIH repository that Fernando and Matt shared is a great resource. This was a big one, particularly with our human subjects. How do we write these privacy considerations, this access via the NIH's 2-page concise resume template? I thought that was a great word, Matt, versus when we actually have things like patients and human subjects protections. And this was a little something we found out when I was getting consultation from all the offices at our institution. We had a lot of long text, and I worked with the PIs in terms of, we probably can't fit all of that in the data management plan. How do we condense it, but also show that we're taking it really seriously? And then if they want to refer to the actual consent forms, we've got those on the ready. And then finally, as I already talked about, that institutional role and support, which is going to be different at every institution, but then also the different PIs, colleges, and departments. And again, always going back to, it is your purview as the principal investigator. So I think that was my last slide. And I believe Sean was going to put the survey in the chat again for y'all. We wanted to make sure we left time for Q&A from all of you. And it can be directed to any of us, or generally in the chat or verbally.
Thank you, Jen, and I've stopped sharing and look forward to conversation.
As well as if any of y'all have worked on these and what you're finding. Thank you so much, William, for your comment.
Any questions, things that folks would like us to follow up on? You can raise your hand or just start your video and talk.
And I don't know if any of y'all who have been working with principal investigators or research faculty are dealing with folks who are saying, do I really need to do this? Do you have some samples, examples? This is another reason why I know all these tools have been put in place, because there is a little bit of a knee-jerk reaction I've certainly had with some investigators.
I'd also like to mention, this is something I didn't mention when I was talking about the DMSP, is when you're working with folks, encourage them to talk to us, the service providers, like early on, and not wait till the last minute, because we, it's going to happen. We do get a lot of folks that literally, like, a proposal is due the next day or something like that. And it's just like, we have a lot of folks that actually need to verify the information is correct. And so it takes us a little bit of time sometimes. And so the sooner we can start having those conversations, the best feedback we can do. I would just want to mention that.
Awesome. I see that Julio has his hand raised.
Yeah, I do. Thank you there. I've got a lot of faces, so I can't exactly tell who just introduced me there.
Oh, it was me, Jerry.
Oh, hey, Jerry. Well, thank you guys for all the great information and organized. It's for somebody new coming into the grant world, about 6 months into it. It can be pretty overwhelming how much is actually going on with, NIH and NSF proposal preparation. Which brings me to my question here, just kind of seeking out some advice or direction. What would your suggestion be for like a new grant and project support coordinator that wanted to put in the effort and time in an efficient, timely manner, or just like a systematic approach towards actually learning about this? Do you think that you guys have provided pretty much most of the information necessary? I mean, I think sometimes I'll sit back and say, okay, how should I go about investing my time in understanding everything that's going on with something like a data management sharing plan for NIH? So I guess the question would be, what would you tell a beginner? Where would you point them?
Well, I guess I'll start and turn to my colleagues to see what they would say, but I would really encourage you to go to your libraries, go to the library's websites. For the U of A, it's our data cooperative. There's a very prominent link to the resources we've put together to help our investigators and our research administrators understand the plan, including some outstanding modules that are short videos that were recorded that provide more in-depth bits of information about budgeting process, for instance, and whatnot. But I would encourage that, and I know that our colleagues at ASU have done something very much the same. So the links that both Matt and Fernando and I have mentioned, I think are probably a really good place for that sort of quick introduction. But this could seem very self-serving given my role at the library. So I'll turn to my colleagues, including Jen, Fernando, and Matt, if you've got other thoughts on that.
Well, I will say as a non-librarian, I so appreciated the 4 video modules that are on that data cooperative page. And I know a lot of my research faculty have. If y'all go to it, you'll see each are about 10 to 17 minutes. They're concise, they're informative, and just really, honestly, kind of warm and approaching this overwhelming plan.
Okay, thank you. You're talking about those videos that there was a link shared for the U of A.
Exactly. I think Fernando just put the link back up. And then also, Julio, you can specify if you're like, hey, right now I just want to know about the budget. So let me check that out.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
And I'll just jump in real quick, say absolutely, those videos are great. And it doesn't necessarily have to be institutional specific. We do have plans to create something similar to ASU. We just literally have not had the capacity to do them quite yet, but it is in the works. And yes, go to those guides.
Thank you.
Christine McCaleb, I see you've got your hand raised. Thank you for your patience.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. This question, I think, is maybe more for Fernando. I've been in other conversations about this, and a common question that comes up that I don't feel I still have a good, clear answer on is for costing of research teams' time or faculty time. And so I know that all the costs have to be put into one line in sort of a direct cost kind of format, but how does that work if, let's say, one of the investigators is responsible for the de-identification process, or we have a grad student who a portion of their time each year is working on that? So how does the costing of a person's time get built into that single line item?
I think that's a really good question. I don't have a concrete answer for you. The only way I can answer that is kind of how other funders might have done that. So just taking the example of a graduate student, I think, timing, allocating the amount of estimated time it would take them to, de-identify the data or document the data would be the best approach. But I don't have a good answer of like, if they're doing other stuff too, like if that would be a separate thing, or if you kind of try to slice it and dice it. I see that Lori Schultz is on the chat. She's the expert on costing. So Lori, maybe do you want to introduce yourself and maybe do you have any thoughts to share on that side of things?
Sure. Thanks, Fernando. I think it's a really good question. You're right. It is hard. And I think the reason, especially for the detailed budget that's over $250,000 in direct costs, the reason that they have additional line items is I think they really want to aggregate what we say this is going to cost over time, because that's their only way of getting that information. We don't report detailed costs back to the NIH when we're doing our financial reporting. So the idea that you might have to split people up and budget them both in the personnel section and also in the data management, I think that is a very good idea, even though it's hard, and it is still an estimate. And I think that, the question that Julio had earlier about how to prepare is, and talking to the librarians and learning about the process is a really good way to prepare. The other way is that talking to your faculty about how they're doing this today will be really helpful for you to know from a costing standpoint. I mean, because I think that as research administrators, this has been a piece of the life cycle that we haven't been exposed to as much as the libraries have, for instance, or people in development have, for instance. So understanding what they do, what their process is, gives you really a good way to ask questions about how to budget. Like, who does that? Who maintains a website? What repositories do you usually use because your discipline really, like it's a norm for your discipline to use X repository versus the ones that are on campus. So part of it is just in the abundant free time we have to have those conversations before the deadline. So.
Thank you. Sean earlier had posted a link to an assessment Qualtrics survey for the session, I believe, and I've just reposted it. But I wanted to be a good citizen because I know that the organizers of this event are very much interested in folks' feedback. So if folks who participate in that survey, that would be brilliant. Sean, anything to add?
No, just complete the survey, and there's a reminder that at the end of the day, there will be a survey for the entire conference day. And then these sessions are recorded, and there will be more communication about where you can find the recordings and copies of the slides at the end of the conference. And then other than that, excellent panel. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you all. Thanks for such great questions.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
How
Yes, thanks for
exciting.
having us.